I think one thing that separates us from everybody else out there is our ability to decorate and create art from everything that we do. So for today, we're going to learn how to set a deep spiral into a piece, which isn't actually going to happen until the very end of the demonstration. So everything else will be review. I'm going to talk through some of the initial steps, just in case maybe you forgot them. I think for some of you, things were going really, really well. Then we maybe took a step backward, and that's very, very common in ceramics. I think in the beginning you're thinking about all of the steps, and then you become more comfortable, and then maybe you don't think about those steps as much anymore, and you take a little step backwards. So I'm going to kind of re-explain some of those things that we talked about in the beginning of the course. So we'll get our wheel going about half of the wheel's possible speed. I would say at this point you can probably start leaving your foot on the pedal. We're going to cone it 6 times by squeezing it up into a cone shape and pushing it back down to unify the clay body. I'm pushing down with a lot of pressure. By pushing down with a lot of pressure, I can help force air bubbles out of the clay and help unify it. As I'm pushing down, you may notice that my elbows are on my leg. So I can use the strength from my legs to not only push into the clay, but also gives me a little more balance. I'm sitting up over top of the clay, so I can use the weight of my upper body to help me center it and to help me compress down on the top. When I cone it up, I want to make sure that I don't allow it to kind of collapse on itself. Meaning that when I squeeze it into a cone, if it becomes hollow right here at the very top, I don't want to close it in on itself. I want to make sure that that doesn't happen. Okay, we're going to open this up. And again, my elbows are resting on my legs for a lot of this. Keep my hands pretty tight along the outside. Find the center with my thumb. Overlap my nails. My thumbnails. Plunge down into the clay. As my hands go into the clay, I stay pretty tight along the outside. I try not to use too much water. If I use too much water, it actually weakens the clay. So I only use enough for my hands to slide through it. We're going to open this up. And to open it up, I usually like to keep my sponge on the outside, and I use my peace fingers to pull the clay towards me. I release a little bit of moisture from the sponge, kind of as needed. And as I'm pulling the clay towards me, I want to draw a nice straight line across the bottom. I tend to make the bottom a little bit wider than what I want in the end. Before I start to lift the clay, I want to take my sponge and I want to make that bottom nice and level. This compacts the clay so it's a little bit stronger when you flip it over and trim it. Plus, if it's nice and level, your hand doesn't bounce up and down on the inside when you start to throw. Okay, I want to start to lift the clay, so I'm going to compress on the rim. I'm going to grab the clay on the outside with my thumb, about 1 inch down, and my peace fingers on the inside. I'm going to squeeze the clay with my hands together at 6 o'clock. I'm going to push the clay up and in towards the center. This is a step that will help a great deal because it thins the clay out from here all the way to the top. And I'm pretty much done with this area. Like, I won't throw this area anymore. When I throw, I'll move my fingers through it, but I won't do any lifting in the top maybe inch, inch and a half. Alright, so we're going to start to throw. Drizzle some water across the top, don't get too carried away. Peace fingers on the inside. And this time I'm going to move my elbow away from my legs for the first time in the process. I'm going to have that out at about a right angle. I have the peace fingers against the sponge. I'm going to back away from my speed a little bit. I'm going to push the clay. I'm going to turn my fingers into the clay and draw a line straight up the form at about 4 o'clock. Move my hands away very, very slow. Dry out the bottom. And we'll do another throw. Now to set a deep spiral, which is what I want to do with this, I don't want to make my clay walls very, very thin. And I don't want to make my shape super dramatic. I want to keep it simple. Drizzle just enough water for my fingers to slide through. Okay, so you see how hard I'm pushing on the bat. See, there's a little ridge here. Some of us are leaving way too much clay at the bottom of our forms. We should really be digging against that clay so we can get all of the clay into the work. It helps it dry better so it's more even. It helps so we don't have to spend so much time trimming in the end. I'm going to try and get all of the clay into the form. And you notice when I throw, I stop before I get to the rim. I don't throw through the rim. And every time I do a throw, I dry it out after I'm done. So at this point, we're about ready to set a deep spiral. Like I said, I just want to make a simple shape today. I'm going to take my metal rib, and I'm not really going to shape so much with my metal rib today. I'm going to use it to dry the form out. And I'll use a sponge on the inside. I'm just drying the form out. All that moisture that I lifted from it. And I can use the rib, I can work up the form, but I can also work down the form too. Sometimes when I work down the form, I'm able to correct some things that I can't correct if I go the other way. And I've decided to just kind of leave this little detail at the top. So I took the little corner or sharp edge of my metal rib and I just kind of dug into the pot right there. And I'll take my sponge and maybe soften it up a little bit so I don't have such a hard line. Alright, so to set a deep spiral, we're going to take the right angle portion of your wooden rib and we're going to start down at the bottom. And as my wheel is moving relatively slow, you guys may have to come over on the other side to see what I'm doing. I'm going to take the corner of that wooden rib and I'm just going to dig it into my work. So then the glaze will sit in there and maybe do some interesting things for us. So when I did that, that created some rough edges, which I don't like because I know that the glaze won't sit on those rough edges very well. So I'm going to take a pretty heavily saturated sponge and I'm just going to kind of work down the form. This is something you can do if your form gets a little funky on you too, because we can disguise the fact that it was funky by setting that deep spiral into it. Stamping works for that as well. And then the last thing I would do, because sometimes my rib gets off from all of the pressure, I would just compress on my rim with my hands together, kind of equal pressure on the outside with my thumb, inside with the peace fingers, and top with the sponge, just to kind of clean that up and finish it off. Okay? And that's a spiral pot. All right? See everybody tomorrow.